Welcome to the Father on Purpose podcast, featuring author and ministry leader Kent Evans and business executive and military veteran Lawson Brown. This is a show for you, Dad. You want to be a godly and intentional father. Unfortunately, you've turned to these two knuckleheads for help. Let us know how that works out for you. Before we begin, remember this: you are not a father on accident. So go be a father on purpose. Please welcome your hosts, Kent and Lawson.
Hey, Dad, welcome to another episode of the Father on Purpose podcast, where today, Lawson and I are extremely thrilled to bring to you a very, very unique and powerful voice in our national conversation around the topic of the sanctity of life. Today, we're talking to Jeff Bradford, who comes to us from the Human Coalition. And in a minute, we're going to let Jeff introduce himself. Before we do, I want to remind you that shows like today's are brought to you by Range Leather. Our friends at Range Leather have amazing gifts for you and your family. And one of the ways we can bring you this content for free is because of their generous financial support of the show. Go to rangeleather.com and use the code MJ15. That's Manhood Journey, MJ15, for 15% off your next order of something amazing for you, your family, or your wife. Go do it today, man. Rangeleather.com. So without further ado, let me introduce our guest today, Lawson. Do you mind if I do that?
I wish you would.
That's code for, hey, Kent, shut up and move on with the show. I understand.
Let's
Lawson,
get to Jeff.
After more than 2 years of doing shows with you, I know what you're saying when you're not saying it. I want to welcome you, Jeff, to the show, and I would love for you to start by just giving us a quick overview of who you are, maybe a little bit about your family, and tell us a little bit about what the Human Coalition does.
Well, it's great to be with you guys today. Thanks for doing this podcast, and thanks for having me on. I'm the president of Human Coalition, but first I'm a father and a husband and Christian man. I've been married, by God's grace, 32 years. We celebrated our 32nd anniversary, and I have 4 children and one in heaven. Our oldest is 27, and he's in the Army. Then I have a younger girl who's 24. She actually works at Human Coalition, and she actually has worked in our contact center and now in fundraising, has over 843 lives that she's helped rescue. I'll tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah,
I have a son who's 21, and he's at AutoNation here in the Dallas area, and then a daughter who wants to go to nursing school. She's at the University of Arkansas, working to become a nurse. And so it's been an amazing journey. Human Coalition, this is the last thing I thought I'd ever be doing. I was a business guy. I sold my company in 2010 and was doing consulting work. So I've been in the for-profit world. So what I loved about Human Coalition is it was started by business guys who are really using innovation and science and technology to reach women who believe that abortion is their only option and bring them into a system of care where it empowers them to make truly an empowered decision. And those that come into us, about half choose life and half go on to abort their child. But these are women that are planning to abort. They're actively scheduling abortion. And so we work directly with women and care for moms, but we also work in the legislation advocacy space to help write legislation that saves lives and cares for moms. And so we've built a national rescue system. We're one of the largest pro-life, pro-woman organizations with about 260 employees across the country. And so I'm happy to go into more detail with that, but that's a high-level overview.
That is fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I recently received your most recent book called Beauty from Ashes. Now, correct me, is this your first book, Jeff?
It's my first book, and it might be my last.
Well, wait a minute. Is that because you wrote it with your wife, and you guys are like, hey, we're never doing that again?
Well, I tell you, there were some rough spots with this book, kind of revisiting some very tender spots from years ago. And but no, it was ultimately an amazing blessing, but it's not easy. And writing this book was both challenging and extremely rewarding.
Yeah, I know a lot of guys would say, man, I can't cook dinner with my wife without somebody throwing something at each other, much less go on a project of writing a book. But one of the things that you guys share, Jeff, and I'm going to start from a position of I know a lot more about you than maybe I would say my audience member may or may not know. Can you give us, and I know it may be challenging to do something like this in a brief form because it deserves a longer explanation. That's why we're going to encourage dads, go get the book and read the whole story. But give us the quick sort of backdrop of your story and the pregnancy and what happened early, and then kind of get us a little caught up on some of what they'll learn in the book in maybe a thumbnail sort of sketch, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, my wife and I got engaged. We fell in love very quickly. We were engaged only after about 6 months, and during that engagement, we got pregnant. I grew up with my father. My parents divorced when I was 10, and we ended up staying with my dad and had a very close relationship with him. He was a good man. He passed away about 4 years ago, and we would have said we were a Christian family. And yet, looking back, it was a very cultural Christian family. We didn't understand what it meant to truly serve the Lord and make the Lord, him of your life. And so when I went to my father, I think from the lens of being divorced and feeling like bringing an unexpected child into the marriage that early might end up in divorce, and his advice was to go to Planned Parenthood. And within a few days of finding out that we were pregnant, we ended up at Planned Parenthood. And I remember we were driving down there and talking about the wedding and saying, hey, we'll go get this done. We'll never have to think about it again and go on with our marriage. And that was the biggest lie that we ever told ourselves. In fact, that was something that we've not stopped thinking about now for over 32 years. And so it was the worst decision that I think we could ever make. And it really goes to show you that, without God's wisdom, we perish. We make life altering decisions that we can never get back. And once you take the life of someone else, there's no getting over that. And although I tell people on this podcast, many who have probably experienced abortion, been a part of abortion, that there's no sin greater than the cross of Christ, and that even abortion, you can be forgiven and redeemed, and God certainly has done that for my wife and I.
In that moment, Jeff, and I think our culture describes it as like a practical, kind of pragmatic matter. At the time back then, you talked to your dad, and that was the advice, and you guys went and did it, like a task that you're going to go do, and then you're going to go to the next thing. Am I hearing that right?
Absolutely. I remember my wife and I talking about in the car, well, the government, it's legal, and our government says it's okay, so it must be okay. And yet deep down, something's deeply wrong. And yet you just shove that thought down and you go take care of it. And the idea is to take care of it as quickly as possible before anyone else finds out, and so that we can get on with our lives. And unfortunately, you can imagine, and we talk about it, just how difficult our first few years of marriage was because of abortion. When you take a life, and it's everything that a woman doesn't want. My wife was looking; she would have never made this decision had I been the kind of godly man that understood that this was our child, that this was the life of our child, and I would have chosen my wife and our child, and yet we felt like we just needed to get rid of it real quick, and that would be the answer to our happiness.
Mm-hmm. If you would, look, it's not just this particular matter of abortion. It's a mistake, a really large, bad decision in a marriage. Early on, when you guys were married, And I want you to hone in, if you will, on this point that I took from your book. You said, I know Tricia would not have chosen to abort our child if I had stood up for her. And so, when I read that, I pictured a fork in the road, and had you just kind of even gently grabbed her hand and gone down this road versus that one, it could have changed the trajectory of your life. But so if you would weave in that thought, but also it's a big deal to get over something that has lasted and stuck with you early on in your marriage. And then, many times couples don't make it past something like this. What do you think made a difference in your lives, in your marriage?
Well, there's many years that we almost didn't make it. If it hadn't been for our faith and our conviction of following the Lord, there would have been many times. I think for me, even in that, having experienced and walked through divorce with my own parents, I remember even as a little kid saying that I will never divorce if there's anything that I can do, if it's up to me. That I understood the pain of divorce as a child. And I didn't want my kids to go through that. And I also realized the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And so we fought very hard for our marriage. But I will tell you, part of the reason why we struggled so much is that my wife always wondered if I would be there for her. When it got really hard, would you choose me? Am I valuable? Am I beautiful, worth pursuing? And are you going to choose me when times get hard? And I've spent the first 30 years, trying to prove that to my wife, that I realized that we made a mistake and that ultimately it was my fault, that she would have never chosen that if I had been wiser and I had wisdom and we had had a father or a friend or somebody come alongside and say, this is your child. You can show up to the wedding with a little bump. They'll get over it. And that's what I love so much about our work at Human Coalition is that we get to stand in the gap and say, you can do this. This is a human being. And we're going to walk alongside you and help you with the mountains that you believe are in front of you and the lies that have been told. And so it's an amazing journey, and my wife and I are just so grateful that we've been able to persevere. But like you said, Lawson, many people don't.
Man. Jeff, the odds of a dad listening to the show having walked through the same exact life circumstances as you are really low. Probably they haven't. However, what we have learned from our dad audience the last several years is that a lot of dads feel like their past constrains their capacity to parent in the future. It's either their past with their own dad, how they were brought up. I never had a good example, so I just can't be a good dad. Or I made some mistakes when I was in my teens. They may not have been the same exact ones that you and Tricia made, but man, I just feel hamstrung or tied or shackled to their past. That I know is true about a lot of dads listening to today's show. If you were standing in a room, you virtually are, with all these dads, what do you say? What are a couple things you say to the dad who feels stuck by his past decisions, shackled with maybe even his own childhood upbringing, or something in his past is keeping him from moving forward? Coach that dad for a little bit.
Well, I will tell you what held me back in so many ways was shame. Shame of the decision that we made. Shame that I wasn't stronger, more courageous and bold. And so, to your point, that we let those things hold us back, and we let the enemy whisper in our ears that you're not good enough, that you can never rise up to what the world expects of you, what your children or church or family expects. What I will tell you, the hardest conversation that I ever had was telling our two oldest children about the abortion. Being that open and transparent, of sharing that your father made such a mistake that he allowed their oldest sister to be killed. That was one of the most transparent and open conversations. It changed the dynamics of our family. It changed the relationship. It was after a sermon by our pastor, Matt Chandler, here in the DFW area, that talked about being fully known and fully loved by God. That we can be known, all of us, all of our mistakes, all of our weaknesses, the things that we think about that we're not good enough, or that we can't accomplish the goals that other people, the expectations that others have on us. God knows everything we've ever done and everything that we will do, and yet he still loves us. I mean, he used so many of the men in the Bible who failed in so many ways. Peter denying Jesus 3 times, and yet he built his church on him. So through the power of our testimony and transparency, it changes the dynamic of your relationship and allows your kids to say, hey, I can fail in sin and you still love me and know me. And so we created just a transparency, I think, for our family that said, hey, even your mom and dad make mistakes and God still loves us. And we will still love you when you make a mistake, because you will. And we're going to be there for you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and Lawson, I know you have a question to ask, but real quick, Jeff, as a follow-up, how did you decide when your kids were ready for that conversation?
I was going to ask how old they were.
Yeah. They were in 8th and 9th grade.
Okay.
They were old enough to understand, obviously, kids at that age. So they were old. The 2 younger ones, we didn't tell. And those are funny stories in and of ourselves when my youngest daughter found out, because like the youngest ones, you just end up forgetting about so much with them. You don't take pictures of them anymore, and they just go on with life. And the older ones, you have all the pictures and you get everything. Well, I totally forgot with my youngest daughter that we hadn't told her. So she was actually doing a debate class, and the only topic that was off limits was the abortion issue. They could talk about all kinds, anything else was fair game, but the life issue. And she fought with her teacher, and finally approved the debate to talk about abortion and the life issue. And so her colleague, her partner in there, had to reverse, take the other side to learn how to do the debate.
Oh, right.
And so my daughter came home. She called me at work and she said, hey, we need to talk when you get home. I was like, what? I thought I was in trouble. I was like, what did I do? When I got home, she said, is there something you want to tell me? And I said, I don't know. What are you talking about? She said, well, and she explained that her debate peer was online and had found our story on the village church where my wife and I had told about our abortion. And so that's how my youngest daughter found out. And so, yes, unfortunately, all 4 of my children are pro-life and have fought for the cause of life. And part of that, I think, is from that early testimony and sharing what we do and why we do it.
That's awesome. I mean, look, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth that because this happened early on in your life, early in your marriage, it's been okay. I mean, you clearly, it's a big deal and it's a struggle, but the Bible says that God uses all things for his good. It doesn't say for good or for our good necessarily. It says for his good. And it's a much bigger picture. So I don't want to, go down the road of it's kind of good that it happened. Not saying that at all.
Right.
But there has been like really good things that God has produced in your life, in your kids' life, in your marriage, in the ministry, that's furthering what your organization is all about. That's great. What has it done for you specifically in the day-to-day as a dad, having this grace that has enveloped you in your marriage because of something that you chose to do early on? How has that grace changed you as a dad?
Well, I think when you realize that you have broken all of the 10 commandments at some point in your life, and yet God still loves you and can use you. And that power of testimony and transparency, I think so many of us hold back those parts of our lives that we're so ashamed of. And yet God will use those in amazing ways if we just give that to him and we allow him to heal us. And then it allows us to give so much more grace to those around us. I mean, how can we hold someone else accountable for what they've done when I've taken the life of my child, when I've broken every commandment at some level, that you realize that, and when you realize that God still loves you and can use you. And that testimony changed my life. Being willing to share with that is why I'm doing what I'm doing. It led me into this work. And now over almost 30,000 children have been born, and moms, hundreds of thousands of moms that have been cared for that I get to be a part of. I mean, that's an amazing thing, to take something that was meant for God, meant for evil, and God used it for his good and glory. I mean, that's our lives. I mean, that's what we're meant to do as men, and is God use us. Wow. And when the enemy says you can't, because I came into this, I knew God's word, but I still was like, God, you need to go find a family that adopted or, chose life. How can you use me? I'm the worst of the worst. And it was actually, one of my colleagues said, you need to start sharing your story. And I said, I don't want to share my story. And he said, at least talk to some men, tell some men your story. And I began telling other men, and there were so many men that said, you know what, I helped with an abortion. I hadn't thought about it for 30 years. I suppressed it until you told me that story. So there are millions of men that have been a part of abortion that they've never talked about, maybe just hadn't even thought about. So that's been been really grateful to be able to share, especially with other men who began to understand, hey, I need to do something about this. I need to repent and be a part of this movement.
Well, as I was reading your book, the stories are amazing. And even as you wove in, when you talk about the talk you had with your older kids, they each wrote some content in the book, which I know I got a preview copy. I hope that made it into the final, because hearing from their voices and what they thought was super amazing. The story in the book I can't quite get over, that I just need you to explain in real time, is you and your wife were going to the hospital when her water broke for your first baby.
I knew you were going to bring this up.
And you convinced her to stop by the office so you could get some work done. I just okay, some of the stories in here, Jeff, I'm like, wow, that's a massive thing. And then I read this story and was like, what is this guy doing? He's driving by the office with his wife. Can you just, do you need to come clean about that story, Jeff? Really?
Yeah, no, now that you bring it up, it sounds worse than, my people perish for lack of wisdom. Certainly had a lot of lack of wisdom, obviously, in my youth. And I don't know what happened there. I work was really busy, and I don't think I planned that I had a little bit of work to do. I don't know what I was thinking, but she was gracious enough to. She said, "I'm not going to wait in the car. I'm going to come in with you in case something happens." And so she sat in the lobby while I finished up some stuff that I had to get out that day.
That is fantastic.
Luckily, it took her she had a very long labor, and so it wasn't until late that evening that we actually had our first son, Jackson.
Right. And we're going to take the clip where Jeff says, luckily she had a really long labor, and we're just going to play that clip on the loop. We're going to send it to his wife, Trisha, because I don't know if she felt the same way about the luckily part.
Yes. That is true.
No, what's interesting is back to that point that a lot of dads will not be able to say, man, I have walked the exact same path as Jeff Bradford, but all of us will be able to say, I've walked a very similar path to Jeff Bradford at some level, right? We've placed work above our family, or we have, made decisions that are questionable that still linger, or we have things we need to get over or disclose to our children that would actually help them. I bet in the ultimate scheme, Jeff, your kids seeing you be honest and vulnerable and even receive the grace of God and go continue to live, they've watched that and now they've seen that in live action. Talk about, as you've seen maybe from around the prism, as you can turn the prism of your life a little as you get a bit older, how has God worked in your family and in the lives of your children through your story? What have you seen? And I'm not looking for sordid details your kids wouldn't want aired on a podcast, but what have you seen in the life of your family that you go, man, absent my story, I don't know if that would have been there?
Well, I found out that my oldest daughter, who now works at Human Coalition, was very angry with me during high school. She was a daddy's girl, and she told me even recently just how much she looked up to me and just that her world revolved around wanting to please me. She was a great soccer player, and all that really revolved around our relationship. And yet during those years after I told her the story, she was very angry. Felt like I had always supported her, but I didn't choose her older sister, which she had always had a feeling like she wanted an older sister. She had always, really desired that. She saw that I took care of their mom, Trisha, my wife, and yet in that moment, I didn't choose the right thing. And yet through that experience, she became a pro-life warrior throughout high school, fighting for her older sister in her mind, the life of her sister. And so when 5 or 6 years ago, had nothing to do with me, there were some openings in our telecare contact center, and she applied for the job and got a job in the contact center. She was working and going to school. And it was, you just can't imagine. She has 843 lives that are connected to her. And she's just passionate about fighting for what's right. And I think all of our kids have had that same gene. My youngest daughter, the two girls are from the very beginning have been just warriors for life and fighting it for women. And so that's been a huge blessing. And you think about a generational blessing. None of our children are not pro-life and have been and all seeking the Lord, and that's been a huge blessing. And I think that has come from the trust and transparency. And so I think if anything that I would say to men is that we have to be transparent with our family. We can't pretend that we're something that we're not, and that brings trust. And that brings closeness and allows them to fail and allows them to be not okay with you instead of hiding. And that's been one of the biggest blessings of our family.
Man, thank you very much for being here with us. I love what you're doing. Your leadership is making a difference. Your family's making a difference. I just want to say that. There are probably a very small handful of guys listening that are like, I don't really have to deal with that. Nothing very much major that I've had to get over. But I suspect most of us listening are continually working through something, and trying to be the godly dad we aspire to be, maybe even rallying around each other, to help inspire one another to be a more godly father, a father on purpose. Jeff, will you talk to the ones who are maybe in the middle of it, that are not yet able to get over, like they haven't yet fully accepted that our past does not predict or make our future? It is part of it, and it can define some better decision making. It can help us grow closer to God and therefore receive the grace and forgiveness, and then turn around and pass that back on. But I think there's still a lot of dudes out there that just can't believe that their past doesn't define their future. What do you say to that guy?
Well, I think as believers, and I don't know if all of the men that are listening are believers of Christ. Certainly, those that know Him understand that we are forgiven, that He doesn't see our past. One of the things that I think a lot of men and women fight over is the past, trying to bring up old wounds, and sometimes one of the spouses will say, "See, you're not who you say you are. You're still that old man, and you'll never change, and you'll never be." And we hear that as men. We hear that as, "You'll never be good enough, and you're the same man you were before Christ. You're the same." And I think we have to rebuke that. And I think even in my wife and I, been through counseling and learning that we can't look backwards. We'll never achieve what God has us. And He doesn't see our past. He sees us today. He sees our future. He sees us as perfect, as beautiful, and as all the things that He's created us to be. That's how He sees us. And so the lie of the enemy is that you're not. And so I just encourage men to keep their eyes looking forward and keep their eyes on Christ and having our identity in Him. And so that's been huge.
Wow. I want to remind the listener the title of the book. Go get it. And then, Jeff, I want to give you kind of like the final word. You can take as long as you like, because I'm going to ask you a loaded question. It's coming at that will hit right at the heart of what I know dads have to deal with and think about. But the name of the book is Beauty from Ashes, and the subtitle is A Christian Couple's Journey from Abortion to Redemption by Jeff and Tricia Bradford. So go snag the book. We'll put it in the show notes. We'll make it easy for you, Dad, to go and snag a copy of this book, because even if Jeff's story is not identical to yours, and it's probably not, there are a lot of threads that we know dads wrestle with in the context of Jeff's story that are present in the life of every guy listening to this show today. One of those, Jeff, is when you were presented with this life-altering problem of your wife becoming pregnant before marriage, you did what I would call kind of the right thing. You went to your dad for some counsel. You went to go get godly counsel. I have written books about getting godly counsel. I've spoken a lot about the topic of having wise counsel in your life and how it's imperative for dads to be the source of wise counsel for their kids, especially as they go through their teen years. But you got some bad advice. You got some advice looking back. You think, man, that's probably not the kind of advice that you would encourage a dad to give his children. The dad listening to this show probably wants to be a godly father. He probably has some, either he's a believer in Jesus Christ or he is open to it. Talk to that dad and take as much time as you need about the importance of having ready, godly, wise counsel that they can give into the lives of their children. And how can we not only give the wise counsel, but how can we create the environment where they will come to us for the wise counsel? Would you speak to one or two or both of those topics, Jeff?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things as men is not only, wisdom comes from the counsel of many, and that we have to have men in our lives that we trust and that we know that we've walked with. I am blessed to have guys since ninth grade, over 30 years that I've walked with, that will challenge you, that will hold you accountable to, and not be afraid to really speak into your life about hard things. Sometimes, when find ourselves in sin, or we find ourselves, we seek out those who will give us the answer we want, not those men who know how that understand God's wisdom and will give you tough answers and give you right answers, not what's easy, but what based on Scripture. And so not only do we have to hold up the answers that we get, we have to hold them up to Scripture. We have to hold them up to not just an experience that someone has, like my father had an experience and he went to divorce, and so therefore he thought he was giving me counsel. But what do the scriptures say, and what do other godly men say? I think you also have to have mentors in your life. If you're not seeking an older, wiser mentor, then you're going to make mistakes in your life. And so seek out men who've been married for a long time, that understand the grass isn't greener on the other side, that you can't just, because we follow our problem. If we go to another marriage, we still bring in the same issues that we had in our old marriage, and they just remanifest. And so why not just go and work on ourselves, become the man that God sees us as being, and be willing to really love your wife sacrificially, love your family sacrificially, do what the Lord's asked us to do. So those have been areas in my life since we've made those mistakes, that I've tried to surround myself with godly men, trying to be a servant leader in my home, serve my family, love them unconditionally. As hard as that is, I don't do that perfectly in any way. But I try to be a model that my sons and daughters will look up to, and that they would be willing to come and talk to me about anything, so that they know they would get wise, godly advice. And, my wife and I, I think you're always working on your marriage at some level. There's always some conflict. There's always something going on. And so I think learning how to love her well, and even seeing beyond what the issue is that she's bringing, but her heart, and how do we go after their hearts? How do we see that they're maybe fearful, and we may see it as an attack, but there's something underneath that. So how do we get underneath that? And that only comes through truth and transparency, and being vulnerable ourselves.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, we work on our marriages, and I think a lot of the dads that I know are in that game, right? They're actively working on their marriage. And then what we find at some point, April and I are about to celebrate our 30th anniversary not too long from now. And what we find at some point is our marriages work on us. Like if we're open to it, we're working on the marriage, but we're also receiving the work the marriage is doing to us. We're becoming refined. We're becoming different. How would you say, last question, how would you say is one or two key ways you are a different man than you were 5 or 10 years ago? What have you seen God do? I know you're different than you were 32 years ago. That's explained very well in your book. In the last 5 or 10 years, as the leader of an organization, and by the way, Dad, go look at humancoalition.org and check out the book, Beauty from Ashes, see what Jeff and the team there are up to. The last 5 or 10 years, coach a dad who's probably married, probably has kids, in the home, probably has kids in the home. How has God worked on you in the last 5 or 10 years?
Well, from a business standpoint, from an organizational leadership standpoint, I think being willing to do hard things that get you out of your comfort zone, being willing to lead in ways that show vulnerability, and realize that it's not really about you. It's about building your team and your culture within your organization. There's nothing better that you can do as a leader than lift those around you to be the best you can be, surrounding yourself with amazing people. Many leaders are intimidated by that. They don't want better, smarter people around you. And that just like a team, you want all those different players to be the best they can be. I think with family and my wife, because my wife and I, if you've been married 31, if you've been married a long time, you've been through some hard times. I don't think anybody gets out unscathed. And so I think we're constantly working. I'm constantly working on myself. And I think for me, learning not to have to win arguments is really important. And just really trying to seek to understand where they're coming from, and being willing to listen well, nurture their hearts, And that's that. As I've gotten older, I've been much more willing to just go after my wife in ways that she is seen and understood.
Yeah.
And that I love her. And so that's been a big difference. I think that,
Well, the next time we have you on, Jeff, we're just going to have a whole show about you and me arguing about not having to win arguments. Let's just do that. Let's just do that together.
All right. That's good.
Be a fantastic show. Dad, you've been hearing today from me and Lawson here at Father on Purpose, but notably Jeff Bradford, the president of the Human Coalition. And I strongly encourage you, go get the book, Beauty from Ashes by Jeff and Tricia Bradford. It's a great read. It's an easy read. Like it's very conversational, but it will illuminate things in your own walk, Dad, that you may have either been ignoring or need to address. I challenge you to go get the book. Jeff, by the way, thank you so much for spending time with our dads today. We really appreciate you diving in.
Thank you for having me. God bless you.
Hey, Dad, thank you for listening to today's show. If you found this episode helpful, remember, you can get all the content and show notes at manhoodjourney.org/podcast. And if you really liked it, please consider doing 3 things. Number 1, share this podcast with someone. You can hit the share button in your app, wherever you listen to podcasts, or just call the person up and tell them to listen in.
We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed.
Number 2, subscribe to this podcast so you get episodes automatically. That helps us as well to help dads find the show. You can do that through your favorite listening app, whatever that is. And finally, review this podcast. Leave us a review, good or bad, wherever you listen. Those reviews also help other dads find the show. You can always learn more about what we're up to at manhoodjourney.org or fatheronpurpose.org. We will see you next week.